Hey there, and welcome back to another Path of Exile 2 0.3 prep video. This one is less prep, more a little bit of talking about slight indirect nerfs to Sekhemas. And let me know down in the comments what you think will happen to Sekhemas. Do you think more people are going to run it? Less people are going to run it? I'm curious to know your thoughts. So, let's get into it. First, why is Temporales so important? So Temporales is being used for generally the highest end build called Autobomber. And this build relies on using Blink to move around the map. And at the same time, this procs Cast on Dodge, which sends out a bunch of sparks. Then you use a Choir of the Storm to trigger Lightning Bolt on critical hit. And then there's some various loops that happen depending on what build that you're doing. Generally, your ideal is that Choir of the Storm will kill whatever enemy it hits. And these are considered some of the fastest builds in the game, which is why they are so popular. I mean, you get to blink around and move quickly through maps and kill everything in an area without even having to manually cast anything. So, everything is empty. You just blink around, done. So this is where Temporales is very valuable, and why is it so expensive is because it's so difficult to obtain. The method of obtaining Temporales is done by farming Sekhemas, and then you'll get a drop called a Last Flame. To give you some context of how rare this is, I did in the range of 600 to 700 runs in 0.1. I never got it to drop. I got this on like my 150th or 55th run in 0.2. So that means I did 700 to 800 runs or so before I got one Last Flame. So it is incredibly rare. Then, not only do you get Last Flame, you then have to actually run it. And to run Last Flame, you are stuck with one maximum honor, meaning any single hit you take will send you out of the trial. You lose the Last Flame's relic. So imagine I don't play SSF, but imagine you're on SSF and you're trying to get a Temporales. You do 800 runs of Sekhemas. You pop in your Last Flame. You're one room before a Zyrok. You took one projectile. You lagged a little bit. You took one projectile. Bam, out of here. You lose the Last Flame. Back to farming another 800 runs to get one Last Flame. So, think about that. It's quite the process. So, Last Flame, Temporales is considered very, very much the hardest to obtain unique in the game, just because of the rarity of the relic and the difficulty of the challenge. You have to go through all 4 floors hitless. There are obviously builds that were supporting this, so I know Sten said he had a build that was this league very consistent. I also have a build this league that should be consistent. I made it at the end of the league and didn't bother running it, but there is a video on it showing it through Sekhemas if you are curious. But overall, like, people are dedicated. It's such a task that people are dedicating builds just to clear Last Flame. There were full cheese builds last league that, were very easy to clear with, but they nerfed a lot of those. And so GGG has intended for Temporales to be this kind of like peak drop that is so difficult to obtain. And both in terms of skill and in rarity. So there's your background in the value of Temporales. And so it's primarily been used in these Autobomber builds, as I mentioned before. In 0.1, Temporales had a 4-second cooldown reduction, and you could be corrupted to up to 4.8 in that region. So effectively, everything, and there was no limit to how often stuff could cast. So when the game first came out, the first Autobomber builds were coming out, and Choir of the Storm could self-proc. So Choir of the Storm is the amulet where critical hits ignore enemy monster lightning resistance, trigger lightning bolt skill on critical hit. That means that once you hit the enemy once, and it would just cause Choir of the Storm to crit. Then you use the spell Cascade support, and every time it would crit, it would basically lightning bolt twice more, and just do that. And what was happening is that entire servers were crashing because Choir of the Storm would basically crit like a million times, and enemies with invulnerability phases were still targetable, meaning that you could still hit the enemies. And some examples are, think of Arbiter. Arbiter has invulnerability phases. All of the Citadel bosses have invulnerability phases, and Probell in Hunting Grounds has an invulnerability phase. So you could still target Crowbell, you just can't kill him. It doesn't actually do any damage. His health doesn't go any lower. And so what was happening is that people like me were going around auto-bombing, and your Choir of the Storm would proc infinitely and crash the instance on some of these bosses that would not die. They fixed that. But then there was a loop that used Frostwall, and back then Frostwall, interestingly. So if we go back to these are 0.2 patch notes. So Temporales unique body armor now causes skills to have -2 to -1, previously -4 to -2. So the best tempos now are about as good as the worst tempos in 0.1. And then we go to Frostwall. So Frostwall now has a cooldown of 5 seconds, previously 3. So you can see how this loop happened. Because they still didn't put a cap on how often something could proc, Frostwall could be cast effectively infinitely. And then you would cast Frostwall, the spark would hit it. So Frostwall would also be in the cast on dodge if it wasn't clear. Spark would hit it. It would cast Choir of the Storm, which would crit and just generate cast on crit. And then you effectively looped Frostwall with Choir of the Storm, and it just auto-bombed everything. It just nuked entire screens in that function. So they nerfed Frostwall. Again, this is for 0.2 patch notes. So they nerfed Frostwall so that you can't do this loop anymore. They also made it so that there's an internal cooldown using Temporales, or sorry, not internal cooldown. Cooldown could not be reduced below 0.1. I don't remember where in the patch notes it was. I might be able to find it. Maybe not. But overall, patch note, cooldowns cannot be reduced below 0.1 even with Temporales. So even if you have a 2-second cooldown, you cannot reduce it below 0.1. So there was quite a few nerfs heading into 0.2, and if we compare standard with 3% using Temporales to Dawn of the Hunt, where we have a whole 0.1% using Temporales, it's a big difference. Now, I do have to be fair. There was for sure a dupe in 0.1 that caused a lot more Temporales on the market, but it's also just the fact that it was actually just one of the best builds that you could possibly run. The cooldown reduction of Temporales made it so that Blink was always on the minimum cooldown possible, and you were only limited by the cast speed of Blink. So you would just, between Temporales itself, you already had 0 cooldown, then it was just a matter of cast time. Now, it's just more difficult. Just more difficult now. And as you can see, my cooldown is 0.51 and my cast time is 0.52. And so this is significantly slower than it was in 0.1. But even if you had tons and tons and tons of currency, this isn't necessarily the fastest build. One thing to note, though, is that this is not Krangle Corrupted. If you Krangle Corrupt, you could reduce the cooldown close to 0.1, which you'll probably be reaching roughly speeds of 0.1, League 0.1, if your cast time can match. But again, there's a few other nerfs as well, so it's just, I don't find it as strong or as high damage as it was in 0.1. You don't have necessarily those infinite loops anymore. And in 0.3, they are fully nerfing that. So there is, if I have my 0.3 patch notes, so here, and this, I'm going to get back to Sekhemas in a second, but here, Blink no longer counts as dodge rolling. So your cast on dodge will not activate off of Blink anymore. And then Choir of the Storm, now correctly typed as a trigger skill, which means it no longer, it does scale off of increases and reductions of triggered. Also means it will no longer be capable of generating energy to other skills, to trigger other skills. Meaning that you can't cast on dodge Spark, your Spark crits an enemy, Lightning Bolt lands, crits, and then generates energy for cast on crit anymore. So that loop doesn't work. So this is pretty much fixed going into 0.3. So between Blink not working as dodge for cast on dodge, and Choir of the Storm not working to generate energy for cast on crits, now we're in a situation where Autobomber is effectively dead as we know it. And I mean, it's expected. GGG has very much said they do not want these kinds of one-button builds for everything. And also their design, like based on what I've seen in how they've designed a lot of the skills and stuff, especially looking at spells, seems like they're going away from what they're trying to move away from one-button builds and having these combo builds. So they want you to generate infusions, pick up infusions, consume infusions when you're using spells. And so these infinite loops that are generating 1,000 attacks per second, they don't make sense in the philosophy, as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah. Autobomber is dead. Who else uses Temporales, you may ask? That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone use Temporales besides just having it on to blink faster. You stick Temporales on, and you blink around faster, and that's it. You map a little bit faster. With all the movement speed gains that we have in 0.3, which, by the way, I have a video for. With all the movement speed gains that we have in 0.3, and the fact that Temporales has very low defensive layer, and Blink also takes 60 spirit, I doubt that Temporales is really going to sell for all that much this league. Now, I'm happy to be proven wrong if something comes out that makes it really relevant. So I'm definitely curious to see if there's going to be some builds with Temporales that actually genuinely incorporates it. And there's always a possibility, too. Frostwall, even if Frostwall is 5 seconds, you can still reduce that cooldown quite a bit with the Temporales. And it seems like we can consume Frostwalls now, so with consume ailments. So maybe there's going to be some use to Temporales again. But heading into 0.3, my expectation is that Temporales is going to be significantly cheaper, and the cost of these relics is generally very expensive, and the body armor generally very expensive. So let's just take a look. Oh, online only, 500 divs if you want a Last Flame right now. So yeah, these are not cheap relics. They are kind of lottery drops. Can't really expect them, but you do can somewhat get them. And they are obviously a big boon, a big jump in wealth if you do get one. So these are not going to be as relevant anymore, I would think. Plus the fact that most people running them would have to have a build dedicated towards running Last Flames somewhat consistently on in Sekhemas. Next, Jewel volume. This one is a big thing. I've had runs in Sekhemas where I've come out with more than one full inventory of jewels. And it's just endless. I just have jewels everywhere. They fill up my tabs very quickly. It's not really a nerf to actually, I'll take a step back here. The reason is that 0.1, most jewels came from Sekhemas. In 0.2, they released a unique strongbox, the Beetle, that runs around and drops something like 5 to 10 jewels at once. And this is really problematic because for every one Sekhemas runner, you probably have 10 to 20 people mapping, if not more. So even if this unique strongbox is relatively rare, you still have an absolute absurd amount of people just getting jewels far more regularly in mapping than they would before. So what you saw in 0.1 is that even like 3-line jewels were somewhat valuable, and 4-line jewels were very, very valuable. There was also much more focus on Adorn, so getting perfect 2-line jewels was also relevant, 2-line magic jewels versus rare jewels. And again, with the lower volume, it meant that even those 2-line jewels had value. Jewels are a big value proposition for Sekhemas runners. So somewhere in the middle of 0.2, they buffed how many jewels we would get. We would get, like I was just saying before, I could get more than one full inventory, which is 60 slots of jewels, just jewels. This is a lot of jewels to look through sometimes, and it's very common that you just dump them in a dump tab, look through them quickly, start reforging. You'll notice that I have virtually no normal rubies in here because rubies were a lot less valuable in general. So yeah, it was kind of annoying. But again, quickly look through, and then you can just throw the junk in a fixed price dump tab. Now, because of merchant, the way the merchant is going to work, it makes it so that it's hard. I don't know if people are going to be searching and whispering for bulk tabs anymore. So if they see 15 chaos for this jewel, maybe they want it, maybe they kind of want it. I would imagine that they're going to go for the person that has it direct listed. And they showed that every time you put something in one of those merchant tabs, you have to manually price it. If I had to manually price realistically, I would not bother manually pricing all these jewels into a tab. And therein is the sort of slightly indirect nerf to Sekhemas, in that we didn't really do anything about the jewel volume. And now Sekhemas runners are going to have to manage their jewels, either still have to deal with whispers and trade jewels, or have to manually price, or start sorting them much more early. Start reforging, just vendoring, dropping, whatever it is, much more early. So again, this is not a huge complaint, really, but it's just something to keep in mind as well. And the last thing, this one is the one that hurts the most. It's not the Temporales, because frankly, 1 per 800 runs, and the only one I did get, I just kept it as a trophy. So for me, like, Temporales drops being nerfed, not a problem, right? But what really hurts, and you can see it down here, is I have very little gold. And the gold that I do have is because I vendored multiple tabs of maps, so that I could generate just a little bit of gold. And this is one of the big issues for Sekhemas runners, is that you get no gold in Sekhemas. I don't know why, but GGG, they did actually make a chest type just to give gold in Sekhemas. And for a whole key, you're getting like 3,000 to 5,000 gold. It is pitiful. You can't even like respec a point off of one chest. And you're spending, don't forget, you have to pick up a key and spend it at the end of your trial to open this chest. So this is one of the really confusing things where it's like GGG's kind of doesn't want you to play Sekhemas. I don't know. Because we don't kill all that many monsters along the way, there's not too many drops. You're not getting a ton of rare gear to vendor. The other thing is, in the middle of a trial, if you had to go and leave your trial, vendor, come back, it's a huge time investment as well, just to vendor a little bit of gold. Meanwhile, in mapping, you put a portal, you're already in your hideout, you click on your NPC, you vendor some stuff, and then you go back into your portal and you're exactly where you left off. That's not really the case with Sekhemas. There's a lot of moving in between zones and loading screens if you want to do that. So it does make it quite a bit more annoying if you want to generate gold in Sekhemas. And the reason I'm listing this in Sekhemas nerfs is because now that trade requires you to spend gold to buy stuff, at least presumably most people are going to want to trade using the new offline merchants so that you don't have to bug them to come out of the map, whatever. Now we're going to need to actually grind gold just even if you want to farm Sekhemas. You're going to have to grind gold just to deal with your trades, which is, to me, a bit of a nuisance. Maybe GGG will buff gold drops in Sekhemas. That would be nice. Those gold chests should be dropping... Gold key for gold chest should be dropping at least 50k gold. Like, I don't think I'm crazy in saying that. So... maybe they'll address it, maybe not. But that's one of the slight nerfs, too, is that even if you do 100 runs of Sekhemas, it feels like you have no gold at the end. And then I'm stuck doing other stuff just to get gold, or again, trading for gold, paying for castaways, etc. Overall, it doesn't seem like there's any huge major nerfs to Sekhemas. Again, Temporales Relic was just a lottery drop, and then just jewel volume and gold income makes it a bit of a mess going into 0.3, but there's nothing super major that's stopping you from running Sekhemas. Of course, the less people who run Sekhemas, the more the value of carries. So people doing Ascendancy carries for payment. And of course, jewels. So the less jewels on the market, the more your jewels will have value. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Check out my other 0.3 prep videos. I still have more prep videos planned, and I will see you next time.